Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be once again continuing our retrospective look at everyone's favorite undead, resurrected, caped superhero with Spawn number 28. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in February of 1995, we can see here on the cover that this is actually one of the more explicitly violent covers we've seen up until this point. We got one guy with his face bashed into the ground, blood coming out of his mouth. Another guy whose Spawn is just crushing his wrist in his bare hand. It's, a little bit disturbing in some aspects, but it's not like over-the-top gore fest either. It's one of those things where the ways in which these guys are being hurt are actually the more disturbing part of it, not the explicit illustration of them being injured. Story, Todd McFarlane. Art, Todd McFarlane, Greg Capullo. A special thanks to Kevin Conrad. Copy editor and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. We see here on the first page, we just get a close-up image of Spawn's face. However, I do appreciate the fact that they, went the extra mile to try and make this a little bit different and not just a close-up of Spawn. It's, got these cool little tiles that are peeling away. And I don't know if this is supposed to signify how his thoughts are a little bit like scrambled or broken at this point, maybe, or it might just be like a cool little way of doing something unique for the page. At this point, Spawn is really upset about the fact that he was, betrayed by the men in the alleyways who, went after him and tried to protect Curse and were becoming like Curse's disciples. And Spawn has decided that he's going to take this opportunity to leave a warning for anyone else who would try and come into his alleyways and turn the homeless men who live there against him. We then get this 2-page vertical splash, which, as much as it bothers me that it's vertical in terms of filming it, I gotta admit, it looks fantastic, where we see that Spawn has in fact strung up Curse on a brick wall with one of his arms being impaled by a pipe, and the cybernetic arm has been ripped off completely, and he's tied all of the different wires and cords that would run through it up against another pipe that's coming down from above. And Curse, to his credit, despite having been handily defeated, is remaining defiant and even tells Spawn, "You're gonna die for this," to which Spawn just responds, "Shut up," and continues brooding on his chair. However, Curse continues to speak to Spawn and states that he now believes that he's been forsaken by God and that he will never enter the kingdom of heaven, and that he is now going to have to end his former allegiances and fight his battles on his own, and that he's going to start by killing Spawn. And he also states that he knows where Spawn comes from and believes that he too has been cursed, and that it saddens him that he has to kill Spawn, and then shouts at him, "Do you hear me?" And this is all kind of strange, and it kind of plays into the fact that Curse isn't really playing with a full deck, in the sense that, the whole point of what he was doing before was so that he could be blessed with some sort of powers from heaven, and now he's decided that, God has forsaken him, and he's no longer going to worry about that, but he's still going to continue on the exact same path of trying to defeat, this hellborn warrior for reasons. It doesn't really make sense. But then again, you're talking about a guy who is not necessarily mentally well. So in that aspect, it does kind of make sense. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, we see that Wanda is driving into the city, and she's doing this as a means of tracking down and finding Spawn. She lied to her husband, Terry Fitzgerald, and told him that she was going to be doing something else for the day because she knew he would never be okay with her engaging on this quest. But she also believes that he's probably right in not wanting her to do this, as this is incredibly dangerous, and they have no idea exactly how Spawn is going to react to her, assuming she could even find him in the first place. And she's really kind of just pondering what her next move should be. She's got all these questions, and she honestly believes that Spawn is the only one who can answer any of them. Also, I'd really like to point out how good the artwork in these few panels is. I really appreciate the fact that instead of just drawing rain or it being dark already, they took the time to illustrate an overcast day. That's something that you don't see all that often, or at least I don't in comic books, where, you've got this cloudy gray sky and that also that the lighting has been redone, in terms of the way it's colored to make it look like an overcast type of lighting, and how like the reflection of the car is different, the lighting on the seats, even, Wanda's skin tone is done differently to reflect the fact that they're in this overcast lighting. I think it looks fantastic, and I really got to applaud him for going the extra mile on basically just 4 panels. As the sun begins to set, we see Wanda still driving into the city, kind of going over in her head all of the things that have happened to her husband, and noting that she can tell he's still having a really hard time dealing with everything that's happened, specifically the betrayal by all of the people he worked with who turned on him, and how he tries to hide all of his, fear and, just loathing and whatnot that he has going on in his own psyche from her and their daughter. But she still knows that something's not right with him, and she's really very, very worried about him and wants to do everything she can to help him, hence why she's going on this journey to find Spawn. As she exits her car in the alleyways to begin her search, she is noticed by a couple of shady characters who unfortunately do not have her best interests at heart. Meanwhile, deeper into the alleys, we see Spawn jump out of his chair as he's finally heard enough of Curse's ranting, as he shouts, "I'm king here," and basically gets in Curse's face and tells him that, Curse is in no position to make threats, and that, Spawn is the one who makes the rules here, and these are his alleyways, and he's not going to have his home turf basically, spat upon by some outsider. As he tells Curse to rant all he wants, he's got business to take care of. But then as he walks out, he turns back and says, "Don't get too comfortable, because I'm going to be back later on, and I've still got plenty more planned for you," with somewhat of a ghoulish smile on his face. As Wanda makes her way deeper into the alleyways looking for Spawn, she starts to think to herself about how this is really outside of her comfort zone. Not just because it's, a dark and scary part of the city, but also because she grew up in a rather small community around her friends and family. And even as an adult, when she got into college, she made a point to keep herself out of situations like this, and, was very careful about who she hung around with and where she went and how she spent her time. Not necessarily because she was a prude or anything, but just because of the fact that she had a very strong idea of how she wanted to live her life and what her goals were and the direction she was taking. And she wanted to make sure that nothing got in the way of that. And as she moves deeper into the alleyways, she hopes that she'll be able to find Spawn and that, she's not going to run into any trouble. However, we see the shadows of the 2 men who noticed her earlier as they start to follow her into the alleyways with some nefarious plans in their mind. Meanwhile, at the police station in which Sam and Twitch are operating out of, we see that Sam is still having a blast going through the file that was given to him by Spawn, which contains all the dirt in the world about the chief that Sam hates so much. At this point, Twitch interrupts him and says, weren't you supposed to give this file to the chief and tell him that, if he didn't stay away from the alleyways, that this was going to be turned into, the news media and the higher up authorities, and it was going to be hell to pay for him to make sure that the police were out of Spawn's hair. And Sam's like, yeah, I was, but, I really want to be able to take the time to put the screws to the chief because I really can't stand that guy, which is kind of hilarious that, he'd be able to do that either way, but it's more so that Sam just wants to keep this to himself so that the next time the chief gets out of line in terms of, the way Sam feels he should be treated, he's going to throw this in the chief's face and basically threaten to ruin his life. However, as he continues to read, something catches his eye that he can't believe as he states, "Oh my God, that's impossible. No one can be that sick." And we don't know what he looks at because they don't tell us. And we then get a little blurb here that states, we're going to find out later what exactly he was looking at, which is fine, but it seems like an odd place to do it in the middle of the comic book. I feel like this page would have been better served at the end and leave on a cliffhanger instead of just, dropping a little breadcrumb in front of us halfway through the book. But, whatever. It's Todd's book. He can do whatever he wants with it. Back in the home of Wanda and Terry Fitzgerald, we see Terry holding their daughter Cyan as she sleeps, going through the files that he took from the CIA and probably some of the files that were given to him by Spawn, as he's still trying to make sense of how it all ties together and what exactly led to him almost being killed in the alleyways by overt kill. However, he's interrupted when the phone rings and he receives a call from one Sheila Egger. Now, this wouldn't be a problem except that Wanda told Terry when she left that morning that she was going to Sheila's home, and Sheila's looking for Wanda right now. After the call ends, Terry hangs up the phone and realizes that he's been lied to by his wife, and now he's terrified for her safety as he doesn't know where she is or what's happened to her. Meanwhile, back in the alleyways, we see that Wanda is continuing to make her way through the trash and the maze that is all of these alleys, trying to dodge rats, wearing high heels for some reason, which seems like an odd footwear choice given the journey you were about to embark on. She begins to question multiple homeless men who are living in the alleys about where she can find Spawn. However, they all play dumb with her. Most of these men are friends with his and are trying to watch out for him and make sure that no one gets too close. One of the men even taking the time to try to warn Wanda and state that she has no business in these alleyways. After a while of getting nowhere, Wanda decides that the only thing that's going to make anyone talk is some cold hard cash, as she finally forks over some money to get one of the men to start to get open with his mouth a little bit more and tell her exactly where Spawn's going to be, as he agrees to lead her directly to where Spawn is at. The man leads her all the way to Spawn's lair and tells her that she just has to go down around the corner, but that he's not going there himself because Spawn quite frankly creeps him out and he believes he's rather unhinged. As he walks away, we see Wanda start to move down the alleyway, saying hello, trying to get someone to respond so that she doesn't catch anyone off guard. But as she turns the corner, she's confronted by something that she was definitely not expecting as she shouts, "God, no," and sees Curse strung up on the wall as he says, "Please save me." She says, "No, stay away," as this completely overwhelms her. She doesn't know what to think. She's terrified. She turns to run and trips on a board, one of her heels flying off. Again, the heels, they make no sense. Like, I get that you had to maybe keep up appearances when you left the house and were telling Terry that you were going to be somewhere you weren't, but maybe stash a pair of Nikes in the trunk so that you have some decent running shoes on for when you go searching for a crazy caped guy who can appear and disappear and you're moving through an alleyway system filled with crooks and homeless guys and God knows what. Just seems like a bad decision on her part. She falls face first in some trash, and as she looks up, she's confronted by a shoe of a stranger, and she's not sure what's happened now. Unfortunately for Wanda, it is in fact the men who have been following her since they first noticed her get out of her car at the entryway to the alleys. And now that they have her, it becomes very clear that they have very, very ill intent on what they plan to do with her. As they start to look her over, one of them has a knife, and the one states, "Hey, there's plenty for all of us to have a little piece of this, if you know what I'm getting at." And then suddenly they're interrupted by a cat screeching and running out of the darkness. As they look down the alleyway, one of them states, "What in the world was that cat so spooked by?" Then he states, "Hey, who's back there? Come out." However, instead of coming out, we see a broken off 2x4 fly through the air and stab into that guy's thigh. Then, before anyone can react, a cinder block follows, hitting the other man in the chest and bashing him up against the wall. The third man, terrified at what he's seen, tries to run away and jumps into a side alley. However, he is cut off and we hear a bunch of cracking and tearing and snapping, but no screams, just a lot of sounds of a body being broken and ripped apart as we see Spawn's eyes in the darkness as he states, "Who's next?" Spawn then steps out of the darkness as he tells the thug to back away from the woman now. However, he's pulled the board out of his leg and holds it to Wanda's neck, covering her eyes. as he states back off or she buys it. However, this just infuriates Spawn as he grabs him by the front of his shirt, picks him up off of his feet, and says, "How dare you threaten me," as he throws him across the alleyway as he lands headfirst in the wall underneath Curse's arm. He's then bleeding, of course, from the top of his head, and he happened to drop a gun out of his pants when this happened. As Spawn approaches, he tells him, don't make the mistake of doing what you're about to do, as he sees him reaching for the gun. However, the man doesn't back off, so Spawn steps on his hand and crushes it underneath his foot. As the man then lifts his head up, Spawn points the barrel of the gun directly between his eyes and says, "Bang." And then he tells the man to get out of his alleyways and never come back, as we see him limp away. He then turns to Wanda and says, "It's okay, but lady, you really shouldn't be here. This is a really dangerous place. Why were you walking here alone?" And then Wanda turns around and says, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for any of this to happen." And then Spawn realizes for the first time who it is he's talking to, as he just exclaims her name, Wanda, in surprise. She then says, "How do you know me? How do you know Terry? I need answers. Who are you?" And Spawn responds simply by saying, "Someone who cares," as trying to tell her the truth of who he really is would be a lot for her to take in. And he realizes that, she's already in a really surprised state of shock and fear, and he's not going to get into all that detail at this moment, as he is trying to process all of his own emotions on top of trying to help her calm down and, realize that she's safe now. Wanda then says, "I need to know something. Why did you help me? Why did you help my husband? What is all this about? I saw what you just did to those men, and you could have killed them, but I didn't want that. I came here for another reason, to say thank you." She then tells Spawn, she almost lost everything when Terry was nearly killed by overt kill. And then when the mob and the feds and the police were all closing in, Spawn was the only one that came to his aid. And though she doesn't know the reason why, she wants him to know that she appreciates the fact that Spawn basically saved her whole family, not just her husband, but for, the fact that she now gets to be with her husband and that their daughter doesn't grow up without a father. She explains to Spawn that his daughter loves her father very much and that she needs him in her life, and that she also needs Terry in her life. And, she then states, though, "You scare me," and it's understandable. Spawn is an intimidating figure. And also, from what she saw him do to those three thugs, she's like, it almost seemed like you were enjoying that. It really does scare me to see this. Spawn, tries to bring her back in and says, "Please, Wanda, don't turn away from me. I'm only here to help," as he reaches out his hand. But this makes Wanda recoil, as she is terrified of his mere touch and is afraid to get too close to Spawn. Spawn responds by saying, "You're really that afraid of me, aren't you?" As Wanda says, "I'm sorry, but here, I have something I want to give you." Spawn says, "No, it's my fault. I'm the one to blame for all this." As Wanda pulls out a picture frame and hands it to Spawn, she says, "I want you to have this." Spawn then looks at the photo and realizes that it's a family portrait of her and Terry and Cyan. And Wanda says, "You didn't just save my husband's life that night, you saved our entire family. And I wanted you to know that means everything to me." But she then says, "I know I was wrong for me to come here tonight. Please forgive me. I'll never come back again," as she runs off away from Spawn. This, of course, is the last thing that Spawn wanted to happen, as he says, "Wait, Wanda, please." But she doesn't turn around. She just keeps going. Later on, Spawn is just sitting alone in his chair with Curse hanging above him still, and the mangled body of the one guy that he killed to protect Wanda. As he continues to look at the photo, it says that he's been looking at it for 3 hours, and it'll be 2 hours more that he looks at it before he puts it down, as we see that his power level is now 7,012, and we come to the end of the issue in a pretty somber and depressing tone, and, a real kind of emotional blow for our hero. We then get on to image info, which is the same as it always is, just a little bit of a blog about upcoming books and what's going on with Image Comics. Nothing special to see here. We then reach this spawning ground, which of course is the reader-submitted letter section. Few interesting points in this one. One, all the letters are overwhelmingly positive, which is refreshing. But two, this is the first point in which Todd announces that there's going to be a new costume in the future for Spawn, which is kind of surprising to me that he actually announced it. And in the letter section, no less, it seems as though he would have left that to be just a surprise. Also, we get several readers talking about how much they enjoyed issue number 26 and how good they thought it was and how they thought the story of it was just fantastic. And in my opinion, it was a pretty good story. And there was one letter that I found kind of interesting where a guy wrote in and complained about his local comic book shop owners going to all the big box retailers in his area and buying up all of the Spawn figures that were on the shelves and then selling them at like 100 to 150% markups on their own shelves. And, he's just complaining about how, like, he feels like it's kind of wrong that those guys are hoarding all the supply of the figures so that they can make these insane markup profits on them. And it's kind of funny to me to look back and see like, oh yeah, like reselling's always been a thing. It's just a lot easier to do it now with, the digital world that we live in now, where like there's, thousands upon thousands of digital storefronts where, you can go in and buy, 50 to 100 of whatever the newest game console is, and then throw it up on eBay for like a 400% markup to try and get people to buy it right before Christmas. And, we saw this same thing being done on just a local scale back in the mid 90s. And now it's turned into this whole global thing, which is definitely bad for consumers. But unfortunately, it just seems like this is always going to be a problem, as we can see that despite people thinking it's something that's happening recently, it's been going on for quite a while. We then get two pinups of Angela. Unfortunately, these are two pinups of Angela that we've already seen, I think, in issue 3 of the Angela miniseries. Now, if you're interested in the Angela miniseries, you can look at all 3 of my episodes on each individual issue of that series in my Spawn miniseries playlist. We then, of course, get 2 pages of Image fan art, which, of course, is more than just Spawn. We also get Angela, as well as some characters from Cyberforce like Psyblade and Ripclaw. As well as Wildcats, we see Grifter and Voodoo. I like that Spawn features not just pictures of Spawn, but Spawn characters, but also like other Image characters in it as well. I'm glad that Todd did something like that. You can tell he was really trying to promote Image as a brand, not just his own comic book or his own characters. We then see an advertisement for the Angela action figure from Todd Toys. This, of course, was the first action figure ever made of the Angela character. Not bad, honestly, given the time period. And then on the reverse inside cover, we once again see the free offer for the limited edition red Bendy Violator that you could send away for. Again, I don't know how rare these are, but I'm thinking it's pretty rare, as I can honestly say I have never seen one of these in real life or ever come across one at a convention or a comic book store. And I have a feeling that trying to get your hands on one of these today would be pretty close to impossible unless you got real lucky. And that was Spawn number 28. And I really think this is a fantastic issue. It starts off in a way that you don't really necessarily know what direction it's taking. And by the end, you're like, man, it's such a emotional heartache blow for Spawn to, finally have his wife come back and see him as he is now, not in a disguise like we've seen him do before. And he has this opportunity to try and connect with her once again, and she's terrified of him. And she, is also saying like, hey, thank you for saving my family. Thank you for saving the man that I love. And kind of telling Spawn that, she's moved on from Al Simmons and she's now fully devoted to her new husband and her new life and her new family. And, she even hands him this photo of like, look how happy we are together without you. And now he's stuck with that, and also stuck with the knowledge that, the whole reason that he ever made the deal with Mabalja to come back here in the first place was to get back with Wanda. And now she's so afraid of him that she won't even allow him to touch her, and she runs away from him in terror. And it's just like the most demoralizing story, man. It's pretty awful when you think about it in terms of just how just horribly devastating this has to be for Spawn and his state of mind. And I think it's a really good story. It's putting Spawn in a position where, we're really understanding that his struggles are not just against, these demons and cyborgs and monsters and criminals that he's fighting, but also like his own inner despair and just how much his emotions are an adversary to him, as well as all of these outside forces. But then again, these are just my opinions. You may think this was a horrible comic, or possibly think that, Todd's just really trying to pile on with pulling at our heartstrings and that type of thing. And if that's the case, well, that's fine, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.